Glory, Sunday 7. We're back after a quick diversion to Matthew last week. We're with the Beatitudes and Jesus doing some pretty solid teaching, which we could no doubt unpack for weeks. We have Simon in Nelson, Diocese of Nelson, Michael and Gillian both in the Dunedin region, and it really is a passage of riches. Gillian, some background.
Yeah, so this is Jesus' sermon on the plain as opposed to on the mount. People can get quite hung up on, whether or not these were two separate events or trying to kind of harmonize them. But really, the key thing, I think, is the teaching anyway, rather than that issue. Jesus in Luke has come down from the mountain and he's appointed his 12 disciples. And he's talking to them. He looks at them in verse 20 and he speaks to them. There are other people there, of course. There are crowds who have come to be healed and things, and they are listening, which I think makes this quite an interesting talk. And of course, we're listening in as well. And Jesus is probably speaking, well, hopefully speaking to us too. So there's a lot of kind of listening and watching and thinking in this passage. And it finishes at the beginning of chapter 7 when the narrator says, when he had finished saying all of this to the people who were listening. So yeah, I think there's some key verbs going on there. But of course, as soon as I see something kind of beatitude-ish or Sermon on the Mount or blessed are kind of stuff, not that we're doing that bit, but I always do think of Monty Python's Life of Brian and blessed are the cheesemakers. So
You're
anyway,
a very naughty girl, Dr. Gillian.
yes, I am. So anyway, there's some background there.
Thanks for that. And I'm always tempted to say, hands up who's fulfilled all this. Let's see if anybody finds some challenges here. Michael, let's ask you.
Well, to cut to the chase, I suppose I was thinking, is there someone in my life, or is there been a situation that has sort of clung to me like a barnacle at all? And how could I, or should I have applied Jesus' words to that situation? And I wondered if that would have turned it around, especially if I'd acted early in that way. So I was just thinking about, love your enemies. There's a kind of wonderful generosity in thinking the best in the goodness of the person, even someone who dislikes and hates you. There's this real openness to maybe of acceptance, if you like, as a beginning point. So utterly hard to do. That was just one thought, I guess.
Simon, what do you find challenging?
I love the way in one of the versions of the Bible I read for the flow and the non-familiarity, having been kind of raised on NIV. I find the NLT a neat way just to kind of shock me out of familiarity. And it starts with, I think, almost, it's a rhetorical question in a way that's translated as Jesus saying, but to you who are willing to listen. Mm-hmm. And that stopped me short because of the sense of this listening being listening being an active decision, and for those who are willing to listen, he then says, "Love your enemies." So there is the sense of an accidental listener, and going back to the Sermon on the Mount and Monty Python, love that, an accidental listener or hearer at a distance. But for those who are willing to listen, there is something about the choice a decision to listen happens in the heart, not the ears. And I think that's an interesting anatomical difference. So maybe Jesus is actually pointing, to a different listening mechanism.
I like that. That is challenging. Thank you. Gillian, your turn for challenge, though.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Lots of little short statements, kind of easy to understand, just on that basic level. This is not like Paul's theology in Romans or something. This is like, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, little short statements. But boy, are they hard to, actually think about how to put into practice. And I was reminded of that quote from Mark Twain when he was asked, don't you have a problem as a Christian with all those bits of the Bible that you don't understand? And he said, it's not the bits I don't understand that cause me problems. It's the bits I do understand that give me problems. Because it's pretty easy to understand what Jesus says, love your enemy. But wow, that is actually a huge, huge challenge. Give to everyone who asks you. If anyone takes what belongs to you, don't demand it back. I mean, what do we do with those? Do we just pretend they're not there? Do we say, well, I sort of do that. I'll do some of them, but not others. How to understand these Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain stuff is actually quite a challenge, I just find.
Yes,
Simply.
it is. I wish we had as many calls to have the Sermon on the Mount on the law courts and the schoolyards as we do for those who call to have the Ten Commandments. So lots of challenge in that cardiac, in that listening with the heart. Let's find some good news. And I suspect we probably will. I'm going back to you straight away, Gillian.
Me, some good news.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I think then the good news really is it feels like Jesus is kind of putting out these possible but impossible kind of expectations on us so that actually we go, I can't do this. I need grace. We all need grace, really. It's kind of almost a pointer to the kingdom of God or the nature of God. Only God really could truly do, or Jesus, could do truly all of these things. And I feel like, right, thankfully, it's like they point me to God's nature, and therefore my need for grace and to always be seeking to do these things. But fortunately, I read somewhere it said something like, that it's not really about high morals, but about a revelation of God, or it's not just daunting and sobering, but hopefully inspiring and exciting and appealing. And it's like that journey with God of grace through every day having to go, right, okay, yet again, remind me I need to love someone like Trump or pray for him at least.
Absolutely. And I love how often these conversations come back to the question of grace or the revelation of grace. For me, it's really encouraging. Simon, good news.
I think the good news that I see in this passage is that the heart of God is for the hard things in life. That people say religion is a crutch for the weak. and there is something, an admission to put my hand up and say, yep, I'm weak and I need a crutch. That's good news that God deals with things that are hard because life is hard. And a phrase struck me in thinking about this passage just this week. I started singing the old Jennifer Rush song, The Power of Love.
Yeah.
Because
I just hit the high notes.
Oh, Celine Dion, Huey Lewis and the News, they all did it. So there's something in this passage about power. When you have power lorded over you, love. When you have power in money to give, but don't count the cost. When you've got, therefore you have power, don't ask for your money back. And if you have authority, talking about forgiveness, if you have authority, love. So whether you've got power working over you, whether you've got power over others, whether you've been given some form of, it's still love. It's how do you use power? And I think that question is a question our world desperately needs really good answers to. And you've mentioned some political names already that kind of that need to understand and hear. How do you use power? You love.
And the questions won't go away. And they're kind of subversive questions, as you've, I think, hinted, inadvertently or otherwise. I don't think it was. Michael, for you, let's just have some good news before we.
Yeah, well, I would say God isn't gloomy, and God isn't penny pinching. God is rather outrageously generous, and I think thinks in the best of us, rightly or wrongly, chosen that road. So that's what I think is the good news.
Yeah, and it is. And That word outrageous, I find really beautifully applied to God. Outrageous love, outrageous forgiveness, outrageous grace. Thank you. Let's then, apply all this and go with the so what. And Simon, I'm going to you first.
Oh, blimey. Hard stuff. I think there is a sense of common, this is distilling. I guess this is the closest we come to the one line, of the manifesto of the kingdom. How then shall we live? Love God and do whatever you like. Oh, who said that? There is that sort of commonality, that there's this incredible touch point for every human being can get stirred up about this idea of loving your enemies and doing good to those who hate you. It is such a distinctive thing that we can all sit around this campfire, regardless of religion, regardless of persuasion, theology, ecclesiology. We can all sit around this, and no one's comfortable. No one's got a monopoly. No, like you said earlier, Michael, nobody's done it. So there is a sense of accountability that we can all gather around this and be as pathetic as each other.
Oh dear, that's also an image that I'll keep for the rest of the week or two. Thanks for that. Michael, follow on from that with a so what?
Well, for me, I would say these words of Jesus are simple, they are unsophisticated, and yet they really challenge the core of our humanity. But if we put them into action, it changes everything. It literally would change the world. It would change our church. Yeah, it would change our relationships and families, workplaces. Extraordinary.
And on that note, I thoroughly recommend, for those of you who remember reading, or perhaps we could read for the first time or reread, that remarkable book, Miracle on the River Kwai, which talks about forgiveness and sharing and love, transforming a prisoner of war camp. For you, Gillian, the final word.
Yeah, well, I was reminded too of the book from 1971, Donald Crabill's The Upside Down Kingdom, where he looks at the Beatitudes and things, but that's been updated and things more recently, and it's still really, really worth reading in terms of that kind of upside down nature of Christianity, Christian thought, and practice. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot, I guess, about the stuff of what Trump's doing at the moment, and that service he went to with Bishop Marion Budd, and he called her a Trump hater, and yet she was asking him for mercy and things, and the clash of worldviews there just seemed so strong, and his vitriol against her afterwards. I mean, if he, love those who hate you, if he thinks she hates him, then where's his love towards her? But, she's calling on him to love the least and the lost and the marginalized. And in our very polarized world, it could be here in Aotearoa, we've just had Waitangi Day and thinking about the Treaty Principles Bill and just lots of things that are going on where the call is, how do I love those who hate me, but maybe who I struggle with, as well. So to kind of love our enemies and all of and pray for them.
And pray for them.
We don't have to like them. Jesus isn't saying like your enemies, be besties with your enemies. We're to love them, to be merciful, to pray for them.
Indeed. Michael, Gillian, Simon, fantastic passage, and thanks for working to break it open. Thanks.